Welcome to the Billable Mom podcast, led by attorney Cari Rincker, where we discuss working motherhood, but especially geared to professional mothers who are trying to juggle their time. Our time is precious, both at work and at home. We talk time management and productivity hacks, the struggles of being a working parent, and provide a community where other billable moms are also trying to calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time. Listen to stories of other working moms, but especially lawyer moms, navigate the waters balancing career and the ever-present demands of motherhood.
Hi, I'm Cari Rincker, and I'm the Billable Mom, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have Jennifer Zwagerman in the house, and we actually met on Twitter. I don't know if you remember that. I was reminiscing like how we met back in the day. I feel like we were kind of like OG Twitter, folks in the legal community, and so much has happened since then, decades later. So why don't you tell our listeners about you, where you are in your career, and maybe just a little bit of your path to becoming a professional mother.
Well, Cari, it is great to see you. And I had completely forgotten that it was the ag lawyer kind of law world of Twitter that we met on. And you're right, it is decades ago now, which makes me just feel old at this point. I am, I would say, mid-career at this point here. I have been with Drake Law in some capacity on and off for 20 years now. But that part of that was as a student. So before then, I'm originally from Michigan and grew up in a rural community, a small town in Michigan. And when I went to Michigan State for undergrad, ended up falling into an ag communications major that was the perfect fit. I loved it. I worked in the beef industry for a while and realized that I was really interested in doing more advocacy and policy type work. And in looking for the perfect master's program, stumbled across law school. And it was that sort of realization that anything I wanted to do with a master's in public policy, I could do that and more with a law degree. And so it made that switch into considering law. Stumbled across, thanks to a roommate, Drake University Law School and their agricultural law center, and moved out to Iowa in 2001 to become a first-year law student. And so really haven't left Iowa since then, but it was the right move. I've never regretted the decision of going to law school, even if I don't practice or take that typical track. But it's been, eye-opening when I was a law student, just to have the experiences I had here, better understand kind of all these broad array of issues tied to food and agriculture, law and policy, beyond just my experiences growing up in a rural community, and loved it. Graduated in 2004, did my LLM in food and agricultural law from the University of Arkansas, clerked on the 8th Circuit back here in Iowa for 2 years, and then practiced food and agricultural litigation with Faegre. It's now Cari Rincker. It was a different firm at the time here in Des Moines before the opportunity came up to come back to Drake. And academia, education have all just sort of been passions of mine. That's what, this idea of education and advocacy is what took me into communications in the first place. And to be able to come back and do that at a place that meant so much to me and, provided so many experiences that sort of shaped my career in life has just been wonderful to be back here. Pretty much, I guess, back at Drake, full-time capacity since 2011.
And you are a mom of 2, is that right?
I am. I have, it's a perfect day to catch this podcast because they just went back to school today. Today is the first day of school. I have a 12-year-old who is in 7th grade and a 9-year-old who is in 4th grade as of today.
Very cool. Time flies. So Jennifer and I met, I think, when you were getting your LLM at the University of Arkansas, and then when you were clerking, and then in private practice after that. So that was sort of the infancy of our our relationship, and I know that you then soon transitioned to Drake in academia. And I'm curious, Jennifer, was that because you wanted to be a parent and start your family, or talk to me about that decision to shift from private practice?
It was a tough decision. I have to say, when I was in law school, private practice was never on my radar. In fact, I did everything I could to sort of avoid the idea of private practice. And yet when the time came, I realized it was something that I wanted to experience and enjoyed it much more than I ever thought. Being at a large national firm involved a lot of travel. And, my cases were exotic locations like Idaho and Arkansas, all those, heavily desired places to spend weeks at a time. And I loved it. My husband and I had been trying to have kids for a couple of years, unsuccessfully trying. And, it was one of those things where leaving practice wasn't on my radar at any point in there. But when the opportunity came up, I had just become pregnant after several years of trying. And I'm a high-risk pregnancy. I have health issues, autoimmune diseases and issues. And frankly, the stress of practice was something that was not positive for my health in general. I know a lot of people can do it, and a lot of people can be full-time mothers and have that national practice. And I sort of came down to the point where I realized that wasn't going to be me. I was already struggling to find balance between health and personal and professional life as it was. And trying to add parenthood into that mix meant something was going to have to give. So I was going to fail somewhere, and there were no areas where I was okay failing in there. And like I said, it wasn't on my radar, but when I had spent a year at Drake as a visiting professor, and the career development director position opened up, where I would still be teaching, occasionally, but really leading the career development office. And like I said, that came up, I don't know, June, July. I was due January 1st, type thing. So all happening at the same time, and just realizing it was something I thought I would really enjoy.
Yeah. The timing almost feels like serendipitous, right?
It was.
This is a godsend.
It really was. And so it was one of those things where it was the right option at the right time for me.
That's fantastic. Well, there's so much about what you just said that resonates with me. I just feel like, and I do know that I have a good law practice here, but just yesterday I was talking to my executive assistant. She's like, I don't know how you do it all. And it seems like that comment comes to me a lot. And it's like, I don't do it all. Like, I'm literally losing my mind. It's hard. It's really, really hard to get it all done. And Jennifer, I know that we didn't talk about this before today. So I'm please feel free to let me know if you don't feel comfortable talking about this. But in your years of struggle with fertility, is there anything that you would want to tell other professional women that are maybe going through that same chapter in their life right now?
I think one of the hardest things is how little we do talk about the struggles part. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think just needs to happen more often. And so it doesn't have to be, that you broadcast it to the entire world, but that you find people that are your confidants, or, especially I think at work, with trying to get pregnant with my first, for our first child, it took years, but was ultimately successful the first time I got pregnant, right? We were having this debate, like, do we try IVF? Do we not? And because of my health concerns, that was really not something we wanted to do. And so we did one last kind of round of testing, and sure enough, there we go. Like, we were pregnant. And so we were fortunate there. When we decided to have a second child, that was really where the struggles happened in a way that was painful emotionally and physically, and required me, or at least made it easier when there were people I could go to at work and who could run interference, or, knew why I was taking off. And, it's not, like I'm missing classes and had a, flexible schedule, but we had several miscarriages in between. And then when I got pregnant the third time which was ultimately successful, we had complications with the pregnancy. And, one time I was having a miscarriage was the day of our huge Supreme Court annual banquet gala type thing. And I was receiving an award from the students there. And I had to call, our coordinator that day and just be like, I can't be there. Like, this is what's happening. And rather than making it seem strange as to why are you not there, there was somebody who could run that without you having to contact everybody. Yeah. When I started to have concerns about what was, the third pregnancy, it was no problem. Again, I could tell people, my doctor says I have to go home and rest. You know what I mean? Like, I'm on 4 days of bed rest before my appointment, and again, there were people who could provide the emotional support, but also help run that interference for you too. And I think for some reason, a lot of times women feel ashamed or secretive. And I think it's because there's still those feelings of something failed or something happened, and it's so common. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that it's different for everyone, but it is so common that I think when you go through it, it makes you understand that better. And I think it also makes me call out people when I hear things like, oh, are you, when are you going to have kids? Or, oh, are you trying to have kids? And you're like, no, let's not ask those questions of
right.
women, particularly professionals, because maybe they are trying or couldn't or whatever. And it really does put people on the spot. And while you always hear that, I don't think it was until I experienced it myself that it really made it kind of hit home that much more.
I can only speak for myself with this, but I'm such an achiever in life, right? I'm used to like just getting everything that I try to achieve. And for me, whenever I was trying to get pregnant, and it also took me years as well. And it was like, well, I don't understand. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had no control over it. Yeah. And it's really hard for me as a female who is used to just achieving things that she goes after. And all of a sudden, I don't have control over pregnancy. It's difficult to manage.
And it is, and it's so much more complicated than we think, right? And particularly when we're talking about what goes on in the woman's body to make a pregnancy happen and all that it takes that is outside your control. But it's frustrating, for somebody like us. I'm the same way, the perfectionist and control freak over here, to know that it doesn't matter what you do, right? You can try your diet, you can try, but there are some things that are just out of your control. And, I think at some point you get to that point where your attempts to control and stress just make it worse. They always say that. And there's probably some truth to that. But that's part of that emotional, I think, stress that comes into that too, of just knowing that, finding somebody to talk to, another mom that's either, it could be another mom or, for me, it was kind of a step up. I wouldn't say they're not my parents' generation. They're that kind of in between generation, but people who'd had kids and remembered what it was like, right? That whole process and knowing what it was like to be pregnant and working their way through it and could anticipate some of those challenges. That was really, really helpful to have, especially when I felt lost in between.
Yeah, I love that. And for me, and I said that, I took a couple years to get pregnant as well. And for about 8 months, a period of time, I was like basically depressed because it wasn't happening. And it was a conversation that I had with a friend of mine at a wedding who was basically like, well, what do you mean you're giving up? Like, I know women who have done blah, 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 tried 8 or 9 times and all the things. And it was that conversation that made me pick up the phone and call my fertility doctor again and ultimately leave the pregnancy. So I love that women just need to be there for one another when they're going through this and not be afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, I think whether it's the process of getting pregnant or the joys of pregnancy, and I say joys in, quotation marks there, and even what it's like afterwards, that I think we have a tendency to focus on the good, which is important, but that's not reality. It's sort of that idea of social media, right? You only see what's good, but it's hard, and it's hard on our bodies. And I am always so jealous of, friends and women I see who have these amazing pregnancies and then like pop right back into, how they were before, which has never been me. I mean, my youngest had me in physical therapy when I was 3 months pregnant, right? So I was like, they can just torment you even before they come out and join the real world. But it's those types of things where that's just average. It's not one extreme or the other, but that's just part of it that we just don't talk about as much.
So let's fast forward to you having baby number one. And I think at this point in time, you're at Drake Law School, right?
I am. It was a hard decision. I'll tell you, the hardest thing that made me decide to leave was the firm had an amazing leave policy, including disability. The university did not. And I had to really, knowing I had a high-risk pregnancy and, complicated pregnancy, really work with my dean in advance to feel confident. They had no maternity leave, really. It was just using your vacation and sick leave. And your sick leave accrues over time. And I was starting at the end of August, due at the end of December. So, that was a challenge. They ultimately reassured me, and it was a good move. But that was a scary step to take at that point when there is so much uncertainty.
So how much time did you take, and how did you navigate that?
I was fortunate that I had my son over our holiday break. So he was born December 27th, and the university closes for about 2 weeks there. So I had a little cushion. I took maybe a couple of weeks full time, but I had the option. This was even pre-COVID, right? This is 2012 at this point, where I could work from home, essentially. And so I probably had 4 weeks more or less off through there, and then started kind of the next 2 weeks transitioning at least some hours at home, and then transitioning back in office part-time for a couple of weeks before ultimately going back. And part of it is just, we were a small office, and I had to do employment reporting, and there's, the ABA has deadlines, and they aren't going to, extend it just because you had a baby. So, there were things that needed to be done that I had to do. And, we were able to work it and extend sort of by being able to work at home and part-time in office, extend how long I could do that and make it a little bit easier. But there was not a long extended maternity leave, that is for sure.
Well, listen, let's take a quick break. Let's hear from our sponsor. And when we come back, if you feel comfortable, I'd love to talk a little bit about your journey with breastfeeding and all of that.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bottorff, SVP of Growth at Lawmatics. Here's everything you need to know about Lawmatics. Ready? We are the #1 CRM for law firms of all sizes. We help you win more business, speed up intake, and boost efficiency. We integrate smoothly with your favorite practice management tools like Clio, Smokeball, and Practice Panther. And get this, 95% of Lawmatics users see an increase in revenue, while 91% see an increase in efficiency. Check out Lawmatics at lawmatics.com and mention the Billable Mom during your demo to get 10% off your subscription. That's LAWMATICS.com.
All right, Jennifer, baby number one comes. Talk to me about what you decided to do in terms of breastfeeding and nursing, et cetera. And moreover, how did you navigate that when you went back to the workplace?
So we had challenges with both kids, some very significant challenges. One of sort of my side issues with my autoimmune diseases that I have Raynaud syndrome. And that impacts, particularly if it's cold, blood flow to parts of the body. And it's typically fingers and toes, those types of things. When I attempted to nurse with our oldest, even though it was a very warm winter, it's still winter. And I would nurse and then I would cover back up and I would have pain for hours afterwards, just basically up until the next attempt to nurse. And so I went into the nurse for the lactation consultant, and she took one look at me and she said, "You have Raynaud's, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." Well, apparently you can also have it in your chest, in your nipples. Mm-hmm. And it was that blood vessel restriction that was causing me so much pain because it was winter and the cold air and just the moisture. We attempted, we could nurse occasionally, but I also wasn't producing a whole lot. So I was doing all of those cookies, every old wives' tale that you had, I was doing. And it ultimately, particularly as I started to transition back to work, just went to pumping because I could control that and stay warmer easier. And we had to supplement with formula to go with it. I just didn't produce enough for this kid to be satisfied and grow. And so at work, it was pretty easy. I have my own office, right? And so I papered over the little window in the door, made sure I closed the blinds, and I could actually just attach the machine and sit there and work. And so the downside of not producing is I was very slow. It would take me 45 minutes or an hour, and I'd be lucky to get 3 ounces, right? But I had that luxury of being able to sit there for 45 minutes to an hour and be able to do that and schedule it, 2 or 3 times a day, whatever I needed. And I had a mini fridge, in my office, so I didn't have to mix, out there. And it actually worked pretty well going back. Travel was harder. But with exclusively pumping, I think that was probably easier than trying to have both going on, at the same time. And with our second, he had a little bit of tongue tie. And so I was actually producing with him. It was great, but he just couldn't nurse as well. And because he was more of a spring baby, I didn't have as many issues as I did in winter. But I ultimately ended up going to pumping, exclusively with him as well. And that was more just to make sure he was happy and fed and less painful for me because with the tongue tie, he wasn't a good latcher. And, it was a decision and, I want to do this as long as I can. And, with the first one, you have those feelings of failure. Again, it's the same idea when you can get pregnant, but it's like, how can I not produce enough to feed my own child? Like, I grew him. How can I not? And, ultimately it's like, supplementing formula is there for a reason, right? This is why modern, science and medicine is amazing because back, before then, you either had to find another person or kids didn't thrive. And so it's like you're finally come to that acceptance of this is just what it is and how it takes. And then you flip it over. And on the other one, we were able to freeze enough that even months after I'd quit, I think 6 or 9 months is all I did for both of them. I still had stuff in the freezer, which was just such a turnaround. So it's so different every time.
To go back to whenever we were talking about fertility and things, I feel a little bit the same way with lactation. I feel like, as a professional woman who's used to like achieving things, then all of a sudden your body is not cooperating. And then you're like, and I think that women tend to be so hard on themselves with like fertility and breastfeeding and things along those lines, because it's like, well, this is how God made my body. This is what I'm supposed to do. But, it's different for every woman. And it took me a long time to just let it go. Like it is what it is. And I pumped and there's formula, definitely involved, there, but, and to not have shame with it. Right. Yeah. So.
And I think that's it. It's everybody's different and every situation's different, whether or not you choose to nurse, whether or not you choose to, pump or just exclusively formula, everybody's got their own situation and reasons. And I think the main thing is just recognizing that we don't know what, why or for what reason. And so rather than question it, just support and go with it.
So I know your kids are a little older, but do you want to talk a little bit about how you've navigated childcare throughout your career here?
Yes. We had an amazing daycare here in town that we used. We were fortunate. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law lived in the same town as us at the time, and their kids were born first. And so they had already been established. And so we were familiar with this daycare that we used in our suburb here. I think the shock for me was how expensive it was. Worth every penny. I often, the days where you were up all night and had horrible mornings and you drop the child off screaming, you're like, I don't pay them enough to, enjoy the silence. But we had just a wonderful group of people that worked there and did a great job, taking care of the kids. And but it was hard. Like, we had to get names on list. Like, the moment we found out, again, this was 2011, the moment we found out we were pregnant, we started touring daycares and having to get on list, because there was, at that point, you had to be on a list. There were no openings for,
Isn't it crazy how intense the process feels? It's like, get on wait lists and just, and then as soon as they open up, like, they're expecting you to drop everything, whatever your current plan is, and like to be there on Monday morning. So
yeah, I just saw on the news yesterday that Iowa launched a new sort of daycare finder website yesterday, trying to help parents sort of navigate that process of trying to find openings and get on wait lists and do that, because it's time consuming, it's intense. I mean, and you want to be confident that you're putting your kids in a good space, in a good place, and that, takes time and visiting yourself and all of that. So it's definitely a challenge. We're fortunate, even in our suburban area here, we had a hard time finding, and I see the mom boards where people are constantly looking. One of the hardest things, we're fortunate that we have a pretty set, good, regular work hour schedule. But a lot of people don't. And if you have irregular schedules, overnights or longer hours, 12-hour shifts, whatever it might be, it's next to impossible. Your options are even more limited in that case. And so, by the time we look at cost and availability, childcare is the number one thing that I think really impacts women and mothers. And, whether it's choosing to go back to work or the type of job you work or any of that, there's more impact than I think a lot of people realize.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I didn't realize it was such a problem until I moved to a small rural community, right? So it's even more so a problem when you get into rural parts of our country. So absolutely, it's a big deal for working women. So let's take a quick break. Let's hear from our second sponsor. And then when we get back, I want to talk about travel, because I know that this is important to you.
Yes.
This episode of the Billable Mom podcast is brought to you by Rincker Law PLLC, focusing in food, farm, and family. When I'm not a mother juggling two littles, I'm the principal attorney of Rincker Law, where we believe that strong communities have both strong families and a food, fiber, and agriculture system. At Rincker Law, not only do we do family and matrimonial law, but we also work with entrepreneurs and agriculture producers on business, estate, and succession planning. We are a client-focused, results-driven law practice. At Rincker Law, we also support other billable moms, not only here in the workplace at Rincker Law, but also with clients, helping them live their dreams both in business and at home. For more information, visit us at www.rinkerlaw.com. Cari Rincker, Rincker Law, Food, Farm, and Family.
So before I had kids, I was one of those naive people that I was just like, go and travel and do all the things. And at that point in my life, I was traveling to Bali and Europe and
I used
everywhere
to
else.
love watching your adventures in travel.
No big deal. I'll just bring the kids with me. But it is more difficult to travel with kids than what I thought.
Yes.
In my life BC before children. So talk to us about how you have sort of viewed travel and navigated that.
We have been fortunate a couple ways. I still remember when I was pregnant, one of the attorneys I worked with, who had 4 kids at that point, said to me, anywhere you can take a football, you can take a baby. And I realized he's true. And what he meant is like, you're just carrying out, right? I think there's a phase, and that newborn phase where they don't move. They pretty much just eat and sleep and, poop. And so if you can take them anywhere through there. It's once they hit that mobile aspect, the mobility, that it does become much more intense just from the sheer amount. It's the stuff you have to take. But also I think there's that lack of control thing again, because you can only control so much when it comes to kids and how they react to areas. I remember the first couple of times I just decided I'm just going to do this, right? I know it could go horribly wrong when I was taking my oldest on flights, but I'm like, you know what? He can fly free and I'm going to take full advantage of this. And it helped encourage me to do that because, my parents are still in Michigan. And if I had a choice of, a 3-hour flight to Detroit with a kid or 12 hours in the car, that 3-hour flight becomes much more appealing. And the same with, there were people that I really wanted to see, and the way to get there was to fly. And so it was one of those where I just kind of bit the bullet. And I'm an over preparer. I'm a worrier. I'm a planner. And so, I would have a diaper bag with anything and everything ready to go, right? But I also had to make some accommodations. Like I used to never check a bag, right? And as soon as I started to travel with kids, I'm like, no, we're checking a bag because I don't want to have to deal with this. I'd rather take the stroller. We'll check a bag. It was, in going to Florida, it was, we can rent a crib. We can rent a swing, and recognizing that expense is just part of being able to do that and to travel. As they got older, once they were 4 and 7, so still pretty young, but that is when we started our road trips. And I grew up with, my parents were both elementary school teachers. So we had summers free and we would go visit our family across the country. We camp, these big road trips, national parks, big fan of the outdoors. And once I became full-time, at Drake, I had some ability to do that in the summers. And so when they were 4 and 7, we planned a trip where we were road tripping with some friends, another mom and their kids down to Florida together in about 3 days. My husband flew in, he'd spend a week with us. But then the kids and I, after he flew home, took about 10 days and road tripped back. No real schedule, no real plan. We had some rough plans, but I'm like, let's just try it. And my mom thought I was crazy. She was like, what are you doing? What has possessed you to do this? And I was like, well, this is what we used to do type thing. But we were fortunate. They loved it, but it took planning. It was, especially when I was traveling by myself with 2 kids, it's 2-3 hours in the car. You take a break. We have a snack bin that they can reach. So if they want a snack, they can reach it. We have, it's the joys of a minivan, but in between the 2 seats is a bin of toys and books that they can access anytime. As they've gotten older, we've added in card games and arts and crafts. But I overpack, but that allows us to do it. You know what I mean? It's, I have a very full van with only 3 of us, in it. But with that, if we decide to stop and have a picnic, I've got all the stuff to have a picnic, plates and blankets and chairs and all of our swim stuff, depending if we have a pool, and we can just explore, hiking sticks, whatever it might be. And it's really allowed us, they were counting this summer, they've been to 30 states, already, and they're 9 and 12, and their goal is like every summer, I'm like, what do you guys want to do? And they're like, well, let's get a couple more states. And I'm like, yeah, not happening this year. But because of like just from the start, I think sort of setting that expectation of here's how it works, and not just making my schedule what we do. You know, we're able to do these long road trips, car trips, and sort of explore, visit friends and family, hit national parks. That's the outdoors is a big thing for me and for them, and just, you know, getting to explore and appreciate that. And, you know, it took completely changing the way I travel, you know, by myself. But I think that willingness, and then just, you know, being honest with the kids. I'm like, there are some days where I'm like, hey, today's going to be a long day. You know, you have a choice. Do we want an 8-hour day today where we just drive and stop for lunch and maybe a short break? Or do you want, you know, to have more driving days and less time wherever it is we're going? And I make them part of the conversation now too, so that they know what's coming, rather than me just saying, yep, we got an 8-hour day today, buck up kids. You know, they understand and are part of that decision too.
That's great. You know, at first when I started traveling with my son, my older son, he did not like it. He wanted to go home. He was homesick. But now he's like, when are we going to go back to New York? And, you know, so it's interesting how it can really affect children positively when you're giving them new experiences.
Yeah.
So I know we're running a little bit out of time, but I'd like to close and ask you if there's any products or books or anything that you would recommend to other billable moms that helped you.
I think the number one thing is find what works for you, right? You know, we're getting all automated, and I'm trying to be environmentally friendly and not use paper. And I have, despite how I can use technology and my iPads, I have found that I need to write, right? Like writing helps me comprehend and remember. So I always have notepads and scrap paper. I went back to a paper calendar just so I can have kind of a display and write things down at once. And I still use all of my Outlook and, you know, electronic calendars and note takers and all of that. But I felt better and reduced my own stress just by adding in that extra layer of the ability to write, and not, it works for me, you know. And I think that's the number one thing, is we don't always have to do the same thing, or what I think of as, you know, more environmentally friendly, sustainable. If we can reduce our own stress, then why aren't we doing that, you know? And sometimes, you know, we go back and forth. Sometimes we have people that come and help, like with cleaning, right? And, you know, we did that for a few years and we haven't lately. But, you know, the first time we did that, we didn't even have kids yet, but I was traveling all the time for work. And I finally, you know, we were talking about whether or not we should hire a cleaning service. And I said, look, I don't want to come home on weekends and spend my weekends cleaning. And so, like, this is a choice for us where we get to spend more time together. We can spend more time with the family or with the kids, and reduce our stress, you know. And so if we have the ability to do that, it's hard to sometimes make the choices that seem selfish in some ways there, but the time and the lack of stress, to me, I think makes it all more. I mean, we talked about the balance thing, right? I always tell my students that how we envision work-life family balance is not this, you know. It's some days it's this, and then I try and turn it around, and other days it's like this. And you have to figure out how to make it not, you know, this and that happens, but then how do we address that? And it's, you know, trying to pull in people, you know, pull in your neighborhood, pull in, or just recognize that it is imperfect. It is never that way. And what's balanced for me is not for somebody else either. I mean, that's, I think, something that we have a hard time with as well, is that everybody thinks they have the same vision of what balance is. And that's not always true for that.
Amen to that. So where can our listeners find you?
Everyone can find me on the internet, of course, right? That's everybody's place to find. So we have the Drake Agricultural Law Center is my professional home. And so you can find me there. It's drake.edu/law. But otherwise, I'm still on Twitter, X, whatever, occasionally. I've sort of pulled back from social media in a lot of ways, but mostly Facebook and all of those. But the professional home is at Drake, and Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those as well.
All right. Awesome. I so appreciate your time and coming to the podcast and just your candor today. It was fantastic.
Well, I appreciated the chance, and it was great just to get a chance to visit, even if only for a short while.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Billable Mom. At The Billable Mom, we don't pretend to have the answers, but instead have all the questions. Please find us on social media and join the conversation at The Billable Mom on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, Pinterest, and YouTube. We also have a Facebook group where like-minded billable moms find solidarity and provide a resource to one another. You can learn more about The Billable Mom and our picks for juggling work and motherhood at www.thebillablemom.com. You can also connect with Cari Rincker directly on social media at Cari Rincker. Until next time, let's calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time.